Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the 1% Better podcast, and this one is one that I've been looking forward to doing for a while. I know myself and my guest talked in probably the middle of last year, and we're teeing it up, but good things come to those who wait, I suppose, and I'm delighted to introduce Joseph McGuire of Clearsight Communications. Joseph, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Rob.
Great to be talking to you of a Monday morning. I wouldn't normally get the opportunity to record a podcast on a Monday morning with other commitments, but it's good to be able to squeeze this in this week. So Joseph, really looking forward to talking about your career, and I suppose a key moment in that happened last year when you released a book, Face Facts. Definitely want to talk a bit about that. I'm going to get a free face reading in some ways as well, which is always good. And we want to hear a lot about your experiences and certainly talk a bit about the book.
Pleasure, yeah. You just fire the questions at me and we'll go from there, Rob.
I will. I have some here, but I always like to kind of make them up on the fly as well, so be ready for tangents. I think that's important. Yep. So I read the book. I really enjoyed it. I suppose I would consider myself very interested in human performance and just people watching in lots of ways. So I was fascinated by some of the insights from it. I consider myself a casual student, but this definitely helped me. But obviously you're more than a casual student. Maybe talk to me about where this deep fascination to turn it into a profession of studying the face came from.
Right. I guess amongst my earliest memories are sitting on the floor in my parents' home as a very small child, and probably before I could even speak, and knowing that on some level, I knew a lot about the adults around me, particularly the men, the stuff that wasn't being spoken about. And I'm not talking about intimate stuff, but just about personality and character and stuff like that. And I was introduced to sport at a very early age. My father was a football fan, brought me to matches, etc. And I knew from watching games that I could pick up a lot of what people were going to do, who was committed, who wasn't, all sorts of stuff to do with, again, the non-verbal world. And then many years later, I lived in London and I studied something initially called shiatsu, which is a branch of Oriental medicine. And I was introduced to facial diagnosis as part of my training. And the Oriental understanding is that mind and body are one inseparable unit. And so while I was taught initially about each part of the face relating to a main organ or body system in terms of diagnosis. Again, because of the Oriental perspective, they talked about each area then relating to different aspects of our personality, behavior, emotions, type of intelligence, how we used, how we thought, how we processed, how we engaged. And I just became more and more fascinated with this. It was like just light bulbs going off everywhere. So I was also working then with one of my teachers in his health food store. So I was studying like 3-4 nights a week and a lot of weekends. And then as soon as somebody would come into the store, he would ask, okay, what's his condition? What's her condition? Right. So it was full on. And I just became, what can I say? It was exhilarating. It was fascinating. It was intriguing. And then after 4.5 years of living and studying in London, I moved to Hamburg to work in a centre, which was a smaller version of the place where I'd studied in London. And it was, I was going to practice and teach shiatsu there, and it made sense to include teaching facial diagnosis. So I just brought more and more of the non-diagnostic stuff into it, if you like, the personality, behavior, and how our emotions and personal history, etc., are revealed in our face. So it just grabbed me so deeply that it was irresistible, really.
It sounds like I'm kind of picking up on that passion and being grabbed by something so fascinating, and it really draws you in. I suppose when you notice that yourself, you wonder, why does everybody else not have that same level of fascination? But I suppose that's a good thing that they don't. Everybody is passionate about different things. When I was reading your book, you talk about face reading being like 3,000 years old, or the origins of it, and very much from the East. And I think what we're going through in the West a lot more over the last few years is this focusing on some of these Eastern practices and skills. Why do you think we're moving or embracing that so much more nowadays than maybe in the past?
Oh, I love the easy questions so early in the morning, Rob.
You told me not to give you the questions in advance. So there you go.
I guess, without going too deeply into it, we're kind of moving away from the old Newtonian Cartesian model of looking at the world as something mechanical, and we're aware that so many of the traditional societal structures have been breaking down, where there's politics, business, etc., religion, etc. There's been a growing dissatisfaction for I guess a multitude of reasons, and I think because so many of the Eastern philosophies, like Taoism, for example, which is what is probably closest to my heart, and Buddhism in its various forms, have been relatively unbroken traditions and have had, if you like, solid practical life foundations to them. People are looking there, and then you can get into things like yoga, tai chi, etc., which are also from the East, and they're very much about grounding, about centering is probably a better word, engaging body and mind together, where we've had over the last probably 200-300 years more of a fragmentation of body, mind and spirit in many ways, and where I guess people are more looking for ways to integrate all of that into practical daily life. Now that's a very very vague general answer, but it's probably the best I can come up with early in the morning.
No, that's fine, and I think it makes sense. I suppose my own curiosity in that area of meditation and yoga, you're kind of scratching the surface, and you start feeling yourself, wow, there's something to this, as long as you commit a bit to it and practice it, and it changes your perspective. Absolutely. You also mentioned in the book some influencers on your career. Tony Buzan is one. I've read Tony's stuff. I interviewed a guy last year who was one of the world champion memory, world memory champions, and Tony Buzan has a background in that as well. What did you take from him? Maybe talk a bit about that.
Okay, in fairness, my connection with Tony was relatively peripheral. I basically spent an afternoon and an evening with him. Okay. But he was a fascinating man. He was a man, when I met him, he was probably early 70s, thereabouts, probably 73, 74. And I guess he had such a sense, an energy about him, such a vitality about him, such a fascination with life. The particular event where I met him, he was supposed to speak for, I think, 10 minutes. He was still speaking fluently and with great animation and passion, and really holding the audience like an hour or 15 minutes later. And his way of looking at life, his way of expressing his interest in life, his way of asking questions fascinated me. Obviously, I came up with the name Clearsight Communications through an exercise in mind mapping, which is something Tony originated. But it was so my immediate thing is the name Clearsight, and just from the exercise of mind mapping, which is a fascinating tool. And using it is a way to draw on one's imagination, to draw out the creativity, to draw out some of the deeper ideas, and to flesh them out and play with them. But it was ultimately his passion for life, I guess, and his passion for communication, his passion for using the imagination. That was what really resonated. I don't mention all that in the book, but that's really what particularly influenced me as much as the mind mapping itself.
When you were putting together the book yourself, did you use mind mapping to help put that structure together?
I did to some extent, because I think anybody who writes a book will tell you that there are times when they get stuck. Mm-hmm. And my greatest challenge was that I had so much information that if I'd tried to write down everything I know and everything that I've experienced, everything that's in my head, the book would never have got written. It's deliberately a very short, succinct book, because I want it to be practical. I want it to be a book that people can carry with them and they can actually use. So the mind mapping helped me to eliminate a lot of the stuff that I decided was relevant, but not necessarily the most relevant bits for the book in terms of what I wanted to communicate now.
Yeah. Okay. Very good, because it's very tightly written, and it's a challenge I find even writing blog posts and whatnot. I can do thousands of words and potentially, there's a lot of superfluous information in there that we need to get more succinct on. So well done on keeping it so tight. Was that the first book you've pretty much put together?
Oh, definitely. I've had people prodding and poking at me for I don't know how many years to write a book, but so it's been a long time in gestation. It's kind of like an elephant, I suppose, in so many ways. They tend to have long pregnancies, but so this was this was a long time in the works.
Very good. So the word facts, I'm fascinated around that as well. I'm actually reading a book at the moment, Stephen Hawking, about big questions, big answers. Just started about 3 o'clock this morning. I think I started reading it. And they talk about, is there God, and, disputing the laws of the universe, and the laws can't be broken, or maybe God could break them or whatever. And I guess trying to map facts to laws, like the face, it's factual, some of the analysis you can do by looking at parts of the face. How, if somebody queried or kind of challenged you, is it fact or not? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I love those kind of questions, and I love meeting skeptics. Cynics not so much, but skeptics, yes, because you can have a lot of fun with skeptics. I guess it's an empirical skill, it's an empirical art, it's an empirical tradition. Traditionally, if you like, in going back to an earlier question, the Oriental practices, the older ones, are very much intuitive rather than intellectual. Yeah. So if you're asking me, has it been proven in a laboratory type situation? Not that I'm aware of. It's based on repeated observation over the last 3,000 years, like the documentation goes back that far. So for me, when I meet a skeptic, what I tend to do is I ask them to take out their phone, show me a photo on their phone of somebody that they know well that I couldn't possibly know, and ask me to tell them about the person. So I can either demonstrate that I know what I'm talking about or I don't. So it kind of puts me on the spot, and then they'll agree or they disagree. So I'm quite happy. I'm quite confident that because I've been teaching this stuff myself over 30 plus years, that there's a very solid basis to it, and it's very accurate, and it's a very practical, very powerful tool to use for communication in so many areas.
Very good. When you were starting out and you were starting to find maybe mini breakthroughs or along your journey of doing it, do you remember any standout client or any standout moment when you said, wow, I'm really beginning to get the hang of this or nail this? Or was there a breakthrough, or was it very incremental?
I'd say it was probably incremental. Although there's probably one standout moment which is actually not the most positive. Okay. Because, as I mentioned, I learned it as a diagnostic tool initially, and probably the first person on whose face I saw serious illness was my own father. And I saw a heart condition before it was diagnosed, and I was a lot younger then, a lot more foolish, still foolish, but a lot more foolish then. And I mentioned it, and soon after that, the condition was diagnosed, but it caused strange ripples in the family. Okay. That for quite some time afterwards, anytime I'd see my mother, she would ask, "Okay, what's wrong with me?" So it showed me that I knew there was substance to it, but it wasn't the best way to learn it.
Okay. Well, poignant, I guess.
Yeah.
That just brings up another question for me. As I said, there'd be tangents. Like if you were, in a meeting room and, you're just looking around the room and you saw maybe somebody that you felt had a condition or something, how does that sit with you? Would you walk over to the person and try and bring that up, or do you just keep those things in? Or, just kind of interesting how that might play out.
It depends on the situation. It depends on whether it would be natural to have a conversation with the person, right. And I certainly wouldn't just launch in and say, "Oh, I think you're ill," or anything, because that would be insane. Never mind, very invasive. Yeah. So I guess I would look to engage the person in general conversation, and then, particularly if it's a meeting group context, I would maybe suggest ask if they'd like to meet for a coffee. Right. Separately, yeah. And then see where the conversation goes. But I guess I worked as a therapist for many years, sure. And I guess one thing I did learn is that you can't help anybody unless you have an invitation to help them. Okay. So there's a very fine line between being invited to help and stepping over the line to invading their privacy. Of course. So there's an ethical, I suppose, code that you need to Has to be. Yeah. Has to be, yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. You mentioned another couple of teachers. Is it Rex LaSalle and Lillian Bridges?
Yeah, Lillian Bridges, yes. Rex was initially and has been, my main shiatsu teacher. I no longer practice shiatsu, but Rex was my main shiatsu teacher. Rex is a fascinating man in himself. Rex would be early 70s now, still working very vigorously around the world. He's a man from Trinidad, and he grew up with his parents, as it were, reading the signs. Like they would tell from what the crickets were doing or what the grasshoppers were doing if something was wrong with a neighbor. They were very, very in tune with natural rhythms. He then became an officer in the British Army. He was trained in Sandhurst, military academy at Sandhurst, and then became an officer in the army in Trinidad, and was part of a revolt. So he's had a fascinating history, but a man of huge inner discipline, a man of huge focus, and he's certainly, and as a teacher, and certainly I learned a lot of observational pointers from him, because he came a lot from not just the tradition, but from his own experience, and he's a very observant individual. Lillian is half Chinese. Her maternal side are Chinese, and she learned literally at her grandmother's knee, because her grandmother is full. I'm not sure if she's still alive now, but certainly full Chinese, but was an advisor to the Chinese business community in California. So Lillian literally learned at her grandmother's knee, and then went and studied the ancient texts. So she's coming directly from that lineage, and again she's been a massive influence. In fact, the first time we met, she looked at me and asked me what happened when I was 28 that had a negative influence on my finances. And the answer, of course, was I got married.
And she was able to pinpoint the actual age?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because the face represents, there's an age map represented on the face as well. So different marks, different lines, etc., in different parts of the face can tell you not so much what happened at a time, at a particular time in your life, but how deeply something influenced you. And there are particular areas then that will relate to finance, amongst other things.
Okay, wow. I like magicians and the like, and Derren Brown and those sort of characters. Would they use this skill in their own performance and acts, like the likes of Keith Barry and that? Is that something they would use?
I presume they use. I don't know if they're specifically using this tradition, but they're certainly using something along the lines, because they would be. I mean, people don't tend to realize just how much information there is available to us. That's where the name Clearsight comes from, because it's so much information available in Clearsight about the personality before we even open our mouths or move a muscle.
Yeah. No, it sounds like. And have you ever had people? Obviously, you've had so many clients from different industries and different walks of life. Help them do better with face reading. Has anyone from that world of magic or magicians or hypnosis or that field ever come to kind of have you help them or train them to develop that?
Not so far, but the door is always open.
There you go. There's a magician down in Cork, actually, Jared Carney, and I interviewed him last year on the show, and he might be somebody that watches and listens. You never know. Intuition, you touched on it earlier, something I'm fascinated about, always have been, I think, through coaching and through even interviewing other coaches over the last couple of years. I've got a better understanding of it, and maybe my views of what it is have changed a little bit. How would you describe intuition, and how does it play into the work you do?
Okay, intuition is one of those. I guess it's one of those terms that's used a lot. How well can one describe it? For me, there's a big difference between intuition and a notion that one gets in one's head. There's a physiological feeling that one gets with intuition. Certainly that I get with intuition. There's a state. There's a feeling of absolute peace. There's a feeling of almost timelessness, almost stepping out of time when my intuition is working well. You mentioned meditation earlier. I've been involved with meditation. I've been actively meditating for a long time. 30 plus years at this stage. So I've learned to, I guess, nurture, cultivate my intuition. So when I'm doing this, when I'm practicing this, whether it's in a group context or with an individual, I've learned to go into a meditative space and empty my mind as far as I reasonably can of any notion of bias, so that I'm just allowing the information to present itself to me. I'm not even looking for specific things, as opposed to allowing the information to present itself to me. So I'm kind of removing myself from the equation. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but it's
touches on it, just on how you actually integrate that into the practice, because like you're doing meditation for 30 years, I'm probably doing it for 4 or 5, and never be an expert at it. It's just, I suppose, again, like anything, you can keep incrementally improving the more you do it, and the more you build that awareness. But the area of bias, I think the question I had was when you see somebody, and it ties into that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, if you've ever read that.
Kahneman, yeah.
System 1 and System 2, you look at somebody's face, and because you've done it so many times, do you very quickly box that person into this category because it's your System 1 easy, lazy part of you to say, there you go, and how you resist that. I suppose meditation probably helps there.
Well, I suppose one of the things that also helps me there is that I've probably had some of the more productive. I certainly had some very productive relationships with people I initially didn't like. Okay. So that helped me. That helped me wake up to the notion of bias, to the currency of bias, if you like. That I realized that, hey, I was making snap judgments. And in fact, I was making judgments because really what I'm about is not judgments. It's about observation, and really it's about observation that will actually help the people I'm working with, whether they be groups or individuals. So it's, again, if in terms of a famous face, we'll take the example of Michael OLeary. When I read about interviews with him, etc. I think, oh God, I don't like this guy. But I started looking at his face, looking at photos of him, looking at multiple photos of him, and looking for. What I started looking for was something that really grabbed my interest. And once I started finding that's interesting, it enabled me to step out of the bias thing and just get into, that's interesting, that's more interesting, that's fascinating. And I just started looking at him as out of sheer curiosity, and as part of training myself to step out of the bias thing, but also to look at the humanity and to look at the person behind what I saw as the facade, I guess, of like or dislike. And And I guess in his case, I realized that he wasn't putting anything on in terms of telling people to stop whinging, etc. That's just how he is. And he's a perfect right to be that way. It may not be the way I would necessarily want to treat people myself, but I recognize he has a right to be who he is. Right. And once we allow people that freedom to be who they are and to be true to themselves, it enables us to engage with them much more openly, much more honestly, much more effectively.
So he's effectively not putting on a face. He's just, that is his face. He's authentic in whatever way he goes about his media work, or probably behind the scenes. He's just showing up as who he is, and you got to respect him for that rather than being inauthentic, I suppose.
Yeah, and obviously in Michael O'Leary's case, I guess, I mean, you're dealing with an extreme there to some degree, but there is the element of performance. We get that. I mean, obviously we get that. He's in the public eye. He's learned to adopt a persona, but in terms of his corporate role, he doesn't want to hear you whinging. He wants you to get on with it, but that's also part of how he grew up himself. He got on with it.
Value, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very interesting. Have you? I suppose, does this work for everybody? Can you read anyone's face?
Okay, in this tradition, we're looking at particularly Asian and Caucasian and Eurasian features. Yeah. I tend not to go near Afro-American or Negroid features, partly because the tradition, partly because of the influence of slavery, where so many cultures were broken up and amalgamated, that you're getting so often a mix of ethnicities, and it can blur the picture. So I tend very much to stick to, as I say, Asian, Eurasian, and Caucasian features. I won't say I would never get it wrong, but by and large, I haven't thus far. And yes, in most, and I would say, and when I say most, I'm talking about 95+%, if not more. You will see a lot of information there that you can accurately depict and interpret. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And is there, I suppose, exceptions to the rule? You're saying the 5% that are hard to do. What is it that make them difficult, or is it that you can read them fine, but it doesn't turn out to be accurate?
Yeah, I guess you're getting into a deeper area there. You're getting into thankfully, I don't think I've engaged to any great extent with them. But you're looking into a different, almost a different realm when you're making eye contact with them. The psychopaths would probably be easier to read actually than the sociopaths, because the sociopaths are not necessarily going to do you harm. You know that they're for their own interest as they perceive it, where a psychopath will be looking to do you harm if they can. And if you're alert, I think you would see I know this is going off on one of my tangents here, but certainly with psychopaths, I'll step back. When you're making eye contact with people, and that's the most important thing really, because the eyes will reveal more than anything else. If you look at somebody, if you make eye contact with somebody and you get a message of coldness from the eyes, coldness or anger or or almost a chill, an internal chill or a feeling of real discomfort, you need to pay attention and you need to mind yourself. You would certainly get that from a psychopath. You won't necessarily get it from a sociopath, because a sociopath could be utterly charming and they could see you as helping you as being part of their best interests, in which case they will do that. But a psychopath won't. This is almost getting into CSI here, but that's my own observation on that one, really. You will then get people who are. You will get a small percentage of people who are, shall we say, in altered mental states, where you're better off not going near this stuff at all.
Okay. Very interesting. It really is very interesting. One of the questions I had was, what part of the face is the one that's most impactful, or the one that gives away as much? And you said it's the eyes, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is there a part that's the most difficult to decipher or read?
I wouldn't have said so, but the eyes are the standout part. You know, the old saying that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and whether one believes in a soul or not, the eyes are most revealing in terms of where people have come from emotionally, where they are, where they're likely to go. Because there's an old saying that if you don't change direction, you'll end up where you're headed. But we'll also tell you a lot about people's overall state of health. And like an interesting exercise for people to do is to get a magazine cover where there's a large facial shot of a celebrity, politician, what have you. Cover one side of the face first and ask what message is the eye giving you, the visible eye, and then switch sides and ask, is the other eye giving you the same message? Because the person's own right side reveals their public persona, their left side reveals their private persona, and you will often see the eyes giving different messages. So it's not unusual to have somebody who's quite comfortable in the public eye and deeply in their private life, or in some case, or vice versa.
Okay. So that come into the symmetry piece as well, or is it purely just the eyes there?
No, that's the eyes themselves. That's the eyes themselves. When you get into symmetry, you're getting into diagnostics, you're getting into genetic background. And you're getting into whether somebody's primary focus is more on their professional life or their personal life, and then the type of how they apply themselves in those areas. So you're getting into other realms as well. Yeah.
Very good. I'm actually tomorrow night. I'm interviewing a plastic surgeon from Hollywood, believe it or not.
Lovely.
I'm going to be asking him questions about self-esteem, and I don't know what else I'd be allowed to ask him, but the area of plastic surgery then and how it alters it. I know you touched that on cosmetic surgery in the book. That has an impact, I'd imagine.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And it depends on whether I'm meeting people on an individual basis, because I do see people as individuals. I do have like individual clients, etc. If it depends on whether you can get a photo of the before and the after, or whether you're just looking at the after. But it's usually pretty apparent where somebody has had work done, and where they've had the work done will tell you about what areas they've looked to influence. And yes, it will relate to self-esteem, self-confidence, self-awareness, how people want to portray themselves to the world. In face reading terms, we'd refer to it as an external manifestation of a desire for internal change. So whatever the change is, it reflects something that's going on internally, or not going on internally, as the case may be.
For sure. Coming up on, well, we're doing well on time, so just a couple of other quick ones, and maybe I get you to give me a quick read, and I'm open. You know, I'm excited and nervous at the same time. In the spirit of 1% better, and trying to give a listener or a viewer some tips. What scenarios are easy? You mentioned they're looking at the pictures in a magazine and kind of practicing if they go by your book. How can they kind of get better quite quickly, or make small changes on how they read somebody to help them understand them a little bit better? Is there any easy introduction tips?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is to focus on one area. So go and observe noses, for example, or go and observe eye. Well, we mentioned eyes, so the eyes are the most important thing, really. But go and observe different eyes, and just ask yourself, what message are these eyes giving me? Just allow the information to come. Not look for specific things, but as I touched on earlier, allow the information to come to present itself to you, and look at different sets of eyes, different shapes of eyes. Not so much colors of eyes, but definitely eyes that are angled differently, eyes that are more narrowed, eyes that are more open, and just a couple of specific tips there. When you see somebody with big, round, open eyes, these are people who are more feeling type, more heart on sleeve. So when you're dealing with them, being honest is really important, and showing that you actually respect their view, whatever the topic is, but showing that you're actually paying attention and that you actually demonstrate caring. Really, really important. And certainly if you're in sales, you need to be very upfront with them. If the eyes are naturally narrowed, like Mr. Trump, for example, a classic example, where there's no visual impairment, then these are people who are clinically observing the world, and they meet you and they're clinically assessing you to determine whether you're of benefit to them or not.
Right.
And then there are all sorts of other variations in between. But they're just a couple of practical things to notice. But really pay attention to what message the eyes are giving you. Are the eyes warm or are they cold, first of all?
I would imagine this is very useful in folks who might be on dating sites, and, swiping on Tinder and things like that. That they can, use some of the knowledge in your book to kind of profile this person. See, is it somebody I would go right or left with? Is that been something that you've been asked for help on?
Informally, yes. There's a particular friend of mine who was on the single scene for a time, and he was using Tinder. And any woman who looked interesting, he would show me her photo, and I'd say maybe, no, possibly, or whatever. Now he's perfectly happy now, but there was a period there where, yes, I was my skills were called into action. Yeah,
very good. Technology coming into benefit there. Just one other one, I suppose. This might. Maybe I won't ask this question until after you kind of give me a bit of a run through, because I might be giving away some stuff. But maybe lastly, around meditation, again, something I interviewed numerous people on, and how important it is. And when you talk about giving yourself that little gap, or the Viktor Frankl, the stimulus and response, so that you have a second or two not to just go into the judgment.
Yeah.
What practices do you use to keep yourself in that space? What meditation or mindfulness practices do you do?
Okay, I don't follow any particular tradition at this stage. Right. What I do find is when I sit in Seiza position, which is I was never into yoga, right. but when I did, if you like, formal meditation sessions, it was very much from a Japanese Zen perspective. So you're sitting in the Seiza position rather than lotus or semi-lotus. Okay. So that's with your knees out, sort of almost like in a V shape, and your feet behind you. So sitting like that is very, very comfortable for me. And then what I usually do, obviously focus on the breath, but I'll usually put on some kind of music which doesn't change, where there's no up tempo, down tempo. It's just on a level, right. So that it's not influencing me emotionally, okay. but it's not kind of blanking out the external sounds of whatever might be going on.
It's like a white noise type thing.
White noise is exactly the term. Right. Although sometimes, having said that, sometimes I will use all the daily noises as part of the tapestry of sound, and just allow them to be there. So it's probably a very unspecific answer, but really the main thing for me is sitting in Seiza, breathing, making sure my body is relaxed in it, and allowing myself to focus on the breath. Simple as, really, yeah.
And when you're seeing a face for the first time, and you've obviously well practiced at it now, I would imagine there's like a tidal wave of information coming at you when you do take that. How do you manage to kind of process that then? Or to block some of it?
I don't really have to think. Yeah, I don't have to think about that anymore, because it's really what's the most important thing. I don't get swamped by it. I bring myself into that space of calm, quiet, detached, and I just look what's the most important thing here, first of all, and I'll start with that, and I'll then allow the rest to unfold. So it's what's speaking to me most loudly first.
Okay. Very good. Brilliant. I'll ask one or two at the end, but maybe just if you want to give a quick reading now. You probably can tell I'm very tired at the moment. That's probably straightforward enough, but that's just the newborn is helping me there.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Go for it. Whatever comes up, let me know. And this isn't live, so we can always edit it out. Too dangerous afterwards.
All right. Well, when I'm doing an individual session, it's never about putting people on the spot. It's never about making anybody feel uncomfortable. Certainly not. That's certainly not the intention. Yeah. It's always with the intention of helping people to identify maybe their strengths more clearly, maybe identify areas that they're putting themselves under pressure unnecessarily, and hopefully help them feel at least somewhat better about themselves than before we started. So there's a few immediate things there. Number one, you've got strong perfectionist tendencies. You like to get things right. Now you also have strong imagination. You have a good analytical mind, but you're not somebody who adheres rigidly to systems. You like to take maybe an established system or an established bit of knowledge and explore it and see where it might go. You definitely have that absolute need in you to explore things creatively and to see, if I did it this way, what would happen, or if I did it that way, and to not to just accept what you've been given as the status quo, or the fact it's always been done this way, so this is the way we're always going to do it, because that will not work for you. So you will delve into things deeply, and you will look to get things right. Now that's both a strength and a weakness, and the Chinese perspective is that there are no absolute strengths and no absolute weaknesses. Everything contains the seeds of its opposite. So the desire for perfection and getting it right is very healthy, but when things aren't quite coming together, you can put yourself under stress. I should be getting it right. I should know more. I should understand it better. I should have got it together by now. And it can lead you to procrastination, and it can lead you to being indecisive, or it can swing the other way to pushing hard to make something work, even when you know it's not quite there. So there's a hunger for learning. There's a hunger for getting it right. There's a hunger for setting standards. And probably setting standards is the healthiest way to look at it. That you want things to be of a high standard. Anything you present, anything you do, you want it to be of a level. So rather than pushing yourself to get it right or to get it perfect, if you just look for getting it to a minimum, an absolute minimum standard, and you will know what that standard is for you, it'll probably serve you better. Yeah. And then anything beyond that is a bonus.
I would answer to say definitely, what's coming up there, even in the last few years of doing this stuff, the podcasting, that I learned very early on is that, there's no perfect episode, because I wouldn't have released any at this point. So I tug of war with perfection and good enough, and I've got better at good enough. So I think what you're saying is right, but I think what strikes me as well is, that is it like when they do a disc analysis, or there's a certain kind of innate and there's certain learned. So I think the ingrained pieces try to be perfect, but over the last number of years, I've kind of moved towards excellence, or getting as good as I can get.
Exactly.
So that would be fair.
Yeah. It's also evident you've done a lot of work on yourself, because the self-awareness bit and self-understanding bit is really important for you. And where I'm seeing that is in the middle of your forehead. There's a lovely deep horizontal line across the middle of the forehead, and that shows the emphasis you've placed on developing self-awareness. And the deepest part of the line is in the middle. So that tells me that you've a very independent side to you that is determined to chart your own course, rather than being overly influenced by your upbringing or by the traditions in which you were brought up. So you're not somebody who's going to be told, we do it this way because it's the way we've always done it, and you have to do it this way. That just will not work for you. That definitely won't work for you, and that will apply in your personal life as well as in your professional life. You're also somebody who's likely to before you start something, you will delve into it deeply, and being not just interested but really deeply interested is very important to you, because slight interest is. Maybe, possibly, but when you find something that really grabs you, then you're really going to give it full attention. And I'm seeing this in your eyebrows, by the way, that your eyebrows have a lovely thickness to them, and particularly at the first part of the eyebrows. That's just the part nearest the bridge of the nose. Okay. So there's a lovely thickness there. So that tells me that when you're really engaged with something, then you really go for it. And that would particularly apply in your professional life. You put yourself under less pressure in your personal life than you do in your professional life. You can ease off. You can allow yourself to ease off much more often, much more willingly, if you like, in your personal life, which is probably good for your partner.
Definitely, I think so. No, that's fascinating. I don't want to get go into a full reading. Just one question on the ears. I noticed in the book you said the ears depict the first 14 years of your life. Like, I don't think if you can see my ears, I'll give you a if that gives you any insight. Do you need a closer up view of those ears to kind of get better at it?
Ideally, yes. I mean, you can tell a reasonable amount from just a small glimpse or a partial view. Right. But the Chinese perspective is that we're a year old at birth. Right. So the first 7 years for a guy, the first 7 years are depicted on his left ear. For a girl, it's on her right ear, and you can tell a lot about from the shape of the ear, from the outer rim of the ear is called the helix, the inner rim is the antihelix. You can tell a lot about not so much what has happened, but how life events have influenced different periods of their life. And a lot of, as we know, the period of up to 7 years, the first 7 years are very formative in terms of how we're likely to be later in life. So there's a lot that can be told there from the ears like that. Yeah.
Okay. And one thing when I was reading through the face chapter, I was trying to say which type of face I have. I wrote down triangle or rectangle. Which one would I for myself under?
Yeah, you'd be slightly more rectangular. Okay. Slightly more rectangular, but there's an element of oval too. Right. And most of us will have a combination of two or possibly even three shapes, but you'd be a combination of oval and rectangular. And the rectangular is traditionally associated with leadership, that we expect people with that face shape to have leadership qualities. The oval is more associated with diplomacy. So that tells me that you have a nice blend, and I don't say nice things, by the way, for the sake of it. That tells me that you have a nice blend of being able to impart your knowledge and being able to instruct people, but to be able to do it with a degree of empathy. So you're not forcing yourself, or you're forcing your information or your views on them. You're doing it in a way that's compatible, or looking to do it in a way that's compatible with how they take on information and how they're likely to respond.
No, very, very fascinating stuff. I'm really enjoying hearing through that. A typical session you would do with one-to-one with a person, would that be like an hour long, 40 minutes? Or?
Typically an hour. Typically an hour, yeah.
You go into a lot of detail.
Oh, yeah.
Very good. So maybe just before we wrap up, I'll let you kind of give a shout out on that. When I was reading through your book, you're planning other books. There's other stuff on the horizon as well. Is there?
Somewhere on the horizon, yeah. There's ideas around there, but they're not settled yet. But there's a lot of information, yeah.
Very good. So there's a series coming. So get the first one out and let that snowball effect. I think probably the first one to be the hardest to get going. If you were not doing what you're doing, is there what other role would you see yourself doing if it couldn't be this?
Oh gosh, if I had a dream job, I would probably like to be a wilderness guide and tracker. Because I see what I do as kind of, I loved watching Westerns growing up, and the trackers were always the people who fascinated me, the people who could look, get down on the ground and read sign. And I've read books about people who do tracking in various wilderness outdoor skills type things. And I won't be doing it, but if I were to start again and I had that option, it's certainly something that would attract me. Either that or being a jazz guitarist, and I don't play guitar, so.
Very good. I'd like to be a pianist, and I don't play the piano either. So it's good to have those dreams.
Indeed.
Joseph, this has been really enjoyable, and I genuinely mean that. I hope you can read that from my face. And put that on. I wouldn't get far in this game if I was pretending. But maybe give a shout out how folks can get in touch. I know we touched on it, but give yourself another plug there, and hopefully folks can get the book, which if I don't already have on the site, on the book page, I will be adding it. So.
Thank you. Yep. Okay. The website is Clearsight Communications. That's Clearsight. That's clearsightcommunications.com. It's all one word. You can reach me by Joseph at clearsightcommunications.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there generally. You can find me on Facebook, but I use that more as a personal page. And if people want to phone me, the number is 087-246-1853.
Perfect. And if half the listeners to this podcast are in the US, so I would say just put on, I'll put the prefix in the show notes for folks if they do want to ring from other countries. And it'd be great to hear from you if anyone picks it up, because, I think this is a really interesting story, but the very fact we could do a reading over Skype, shows the value of it. And I'm not just saying that you nailed pretty much all the stuff there. It's true. So really enjoyed it. Last one, if you could recommend a book other than your own that somebody might like to read at some point, what one comes up?
Okay, if it's on the topic of face reading, then I'd probably go with Amazing Face Reading. It's by a man called Mac Fulfer. That's MacFulfer. He's a Texan. He's a former lawyer who was introduced to face reading and became so fascinated. We started doing it at country fairs and became so fascinated with it and so in demand that his law practice effectively went by the side. So he's now working very much in the areas like jury selection and working in the corporate world. So his book is very practical. It's rather, mine has colored images. His is black and white drawings, but very, very accessible and very readable and very usable.
Very good, and I'll maybe add that one as well, but I would recommend yours certainly before that one. Joseph, we leave it there. It's been really enjoyable. I'm glad we got to do this at last. And
absolute pleasure, Rob.
Looking forward to sharing the full audio podcast, and I'll probably put out a good portion of the video piece as well, so folks can hear the reading, see the reading as well.
I'm looking forward to listening back and learning something as well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'll take some notes on the way back. So, Joseph, look, thanks so much. Have a great Monday, and
thank you, Rob.
Stay in touch.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.